I myself don't like to see any kind of churn. And they said, well, we're looking at integrations and we're probably going to go find a partner for integration. And I said, we just acquired an integration company. Would you like to talk to them? And we were able to do an expansion to that particular integration. So what originally started out at first a $2.2 million churn actually turned out into full renewal with expansion on top of that and retain that relationship.
Welcome to Customer Unsuccess, the podcast where we cut out the noise and talk with real leaders about their hardest lessons in customer success and other go-to-market motions. I'm your host, Joe DeGrande, and in each episode, we're going to unpack real challenges from real leaders, failed tech implementations, a strategy that didn't yield results, or difficult customers. But more importantly, we're going to take those lessons learned and share them with you so that way you can avoid those same mistakes with your team. So if you're in customer success, sales, or other go-to-market motions, stick around to hear from the best. Now let's dig into it. Today, we're going to be talking about what it really takes to save a multi-million-dollar customer relationship when they're on the brink of churning. So I'm going to be joined with Edra Williams, who's currently the Chief Customer Officer at DeepHow, and she's led customer success teams at massive companies like Salesforce and SAP. And she shares a story of stepping into a $2.2 million deal where the customer was ready to walk away. And we dive into how Edra and her team turned into that projected contraction or churn from risk of renewal and even expanded the relationship. And all just by carefully listening and aligning those business outcomes and building a true go-to-market strategy. Plus, we unpack her approach to early renewal planning, her red, yellow, green forecasting approach, and why CS leaders need to embrace revenue and operational process if they want to survive in today's market. So I really enjoyed this conversation with Edra, and I hope you will too. So let's jump into it.
Well, NPR just did a study. Well, it was on NPR, so I don't know if they did it, but they said that this generation is not getting married because they have pets and they feel like that's enough of a relationship. I'm not so sure about that, but at least that's what they're saying.
Yeah. No, it's coming up quite a bit. But even our own family keeps asking, like, when is it? I'm like, I got the dog. It's fine. I have that responsibility. It's good.
Yep. Yeah, that's a whole different generation.
Good stuff. Well, welcome to the show. Thanks again, for coming on. And, for those of you just, hopping in, I have Edra Williams here. She is got a wealth of knowledge in customer success. She's been at companies like Salesforce, SAP. Currently, she's now the Chief Customer Officer at DeepHow. And, so her and I have connected actually through a mutual connection. Actually, I think she was on another podcast, Retain and Gain, so check that out if you haven't listened to it. Awesome session. But thanks again for joining, Edra.
No, Joe, thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this one because this is a different take on any of the podcasts I've been on. I love the concept.
Yeah, for sure. No, listen, I've had plenty of mistakes in my career being like 10 years in the game. And I'm like, you know what? I wish I had, that little bit of like what not to do as opposed to what to do. And you could definitely dodge, a lot of pitfalls, but I'm sure, again, your experience, you probably got tons of stories yourself. So I'm curious to hear, what's on your mind.
There's one that I really like to share, and it's really important because for those of you that follow me on LinkedIn or you've seen anything in the podcast, I am laser focused on revenue. And earlier in my career, when I was working for one of those, big box companies, for lack of a better term, I was managing a really large renewal. It was for a fintech customer. The renewal was for $2.2 million. So not a little one. And the initial meeting, we were conducting what in essence was a quarterly business reviewer, as we say in the customer success world, a QBR. And the CFO said to me, we've been with you for a while and we really don't feel like this is a partnership. We feel like we're basically a widget for this company. And we're looking at reevaluating that relationship. Well, the first thing I thought to myself is, he just said to me that $2.2 million is about to go away. So as I contained myself and thought about not panicking, I said, okay, what do you think this relationship needs to look like? And we had a very insightful conversation. He talked about some of the things because this particular company had what we call a wall-to-wall relationship with us. It meant they owned almost every product or service that we offered in our company. So that for them was a huge investment. And to have them say that it wasn't a partnership was unsettling. I would also like to qualify that I was new to the account. So I will say that. But
Gotcha.
as a success director in this role, that meant that I had to bring in the go-to-market team. And what I did first off was after I listened to this customer and heard this individual's challenges that he saw and also what he envisioned the relationship to be going forward, I went back to my go to market team. And that meant that I brought in the sales execs for all of those different, what we considered different relationships. So they had a marketing relationship and a sales relationship. So I had to bring in the go to market leads for each one of those specific relationships for this customer. And then we sat down and we developed a plan. And based on what he said were the company challenges, like I said, the lack of a relationship, in some instances, lack of
Hmm.
adoption or usage, in some cases, not really seeing the value for that particular feature or function. We projected that renewal, which was originally supposed to be 2.2 million, to have at least a $1.1 million attrit or churn.
Wow.
Still big, still big. Something
That's
we
a
did
big
not want to see
contraction.
losing it. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so what we did was we put together a red team and we sat down and we said, what is it going to take to salvage this relationship? First and foremost, to keep the relationship, to not have it churn, to not lose the whole
Right.
point, but to do what we could to minimize that. And it started with each go to market lead going back to the customer lead for those or line of business leads for each one. So, for example, this customer we found out because it was a fintech customer, they were actually financing. I can't really get into what they were financing because it'll tell you who the company was, but they
Sure. No
actually
worries.
were doing financing and they were wanting to go into another market. And we
Hmm.
said, we've got huge presence in that market. We can let you talk to customers that are already in that market. So that's the first thing. And then they said they were wanting to develop campaigns, but they weren't utilizing our campaign features. So we had our marketing leads sit down with their marketing leads and show them the types of campaigns they could sort of build out utilizing our solution and then help them develop a go to market strategy. So
Hmm.
that was great. We could retain that particular feature that they were owning. But then they had different, what we consider portals. And for those
Hmm.
portals, they had different relationships. They had one for their community, they had one for their partners, and they were underutilizing one portal and overutilizing other. So we did a right sizing of those licenses so that
Hmm.
for the ones they were underutilizing, let's just move some of those licenses over to the ones they were overutilizing so we could right size that and retain that relationship. So we
Hmm.
did that for each particular feature that they owned within our portfolio. And we started out with, like I said, a $1.1 million potential churn. We got it down to about 200K. And this wasn't easy.
Wow.
This was meetings. We started a year out. I will say we started a
Okay.
year out from this renewal. And so by about month 6, after having all of these internal meetings, it got down to about 200K of potential churn. I myself don't like to see any kind of churn. So
Sure.
we went back to them and we said, we think that we're okay. We think that we can salvage this relationship. We want to partner with you. And this is where we see there's a delta. And they said, well, you know what? We're looking at integrations and we're probably going to go find a partner for integration. And I said, well, we just acquired an integration company. We just brought them into our portfolio. Would you like to
Nice.
talk to them? And they said, really? And we had a meeting with, and they literally had, we just signed the ink on this deal with this company. They weren't even in our portfolio yet, but we had a meeting and we were able to do an expansion, okay,
Hmm.
a definite upsell to that particular integration. So what originally started out at first a $2.2 million churn, then possibly $1 million churn, actually turned out into full renewal with expansion on top of
Wow.
that and retain that relationship. So that's that story. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that or any questions about it. But that's a lesson learned because we didn't have a good relationship with that customer, but we were able to salvage it and actually have an expansion deal as a part of that.
So many good nuggets in there. Love the story. And also too, the fact that one, I think it's good to acknowledge, right? Like everyone could at some point you're going to expect churn to a certain degree, but you guys kept pushing, which was great. And the fact that you were, and you said that was it flat, or was there an increase in the renewal at that time? I mean, if you remember, I don't know if you remember or not.
Well, originally there was not going to be an increase because there was no expansion tied to it because they
Right.
were just really saying we're not utilizing your product at all.
Sure.
So that's where the churn was coming from. So yeah,
Mm,
originally it was going to be
originally,
it was
yeah.
going to take a hit. Correct.
I mean, the fact that, that you were able to bring it back. I mean, one, I think like key takeaway there is relationship building too. I think a big
Yes,
thing.
I would agree.
Yeah, a big thing too, which is I really want to tap into. One, you said you were new to the account coming into it, but also too, you started a year out. I guess like tell me like about your time when you were managing a book of accounts. I don't think you're doing that at the moment, but like when your thought process, if you're advising a CSM, right? You sounds like you were ahead of the curve. Like you just jumped into it, you right away, not like 3 months out, not 5 months out. Like you were on the ball from the beginning.
Yeah, no, and Joe, thanks for recognizing that because I have a very rigorous renewal process. My team will tell you that I'm laser focused on it. We set up basically a red green scenario. And
Mm,
what we do is any account that's green and that means that it has a probability of about 80% or more. If it's green, we start talking to them about 6 months out, which
mm,
is unheard of in the industry. Sometimes they don't talk to them until about a month before. 6 months out,
oof.
even if it's green, we're still
Yeah.
having a conversation with them. And it's actually set up in our system. That way we have it built out in our CSP system so that it does that. And
Hmm.
then if it's less than 80%, between 40 and 70, 79
Yep.
technically, that's what we consider a yellow. And that
Okay.
yellow gets the our CRO involved, it gets me
Hmm.
involved, and it gets the initial accounting. And we're internally developing plans to figure out how do we move that customer from yellow to green. And we're doing
Got
that
it.
again as soon as we find out. So we're not waiting. But anytime it drops below 40% probability of close for that renewal, we put in a red team. And that goes all the way up to our CEO. And that literally allows us to really engage everybody, all hands on deck. We develop a red account probability and mobilization team that literally figures out how do we get this customer first to yellow and then to green. We have a timeline, and then we start immediately conducting customer meetings, and that can start as far as a year out. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. It's actually it's actually quite scary, at least for me, in my opinion, when I hear people reaching out 30 days before renewal. I've actually had it
It
happen to
happens.
myself on the receiving end.
It happens.
um,
It happens. Yeah.
oh, it does. It does. But no, that's great though. I love the the setup that you have kind of in those buckets of different, from red, yellow, green, because also too it's simple. It's simple to digest too. I think like when you're doing your reporting,
Yep.
segmenting too, if you want to run.
It
I
comes up
mean,
on my dashboard. Everything that's red, I'm
that's it.
laser focused on it. Yes,
I'm curious
absolutely.
now, and I know we're kind of getting a little sidetracked. This is great. I mean, this is obviously very informal how we do things, but I'm curious now. When you do that, are you looking at a particular segment? Like, do you have different like criteria for particular ARR? Like, all right, for accounts that are worth X in this range, all right, we're not going to implement this strategy if it's red or yellow. We're going to do a different strategy. I'm like curious on like how deep do you kind of break that down, or if you've done it in
No,
the past?
that's a very good question. From a past perspective, because I'll speak to that.
Hmm.
We're looking at growth accounts. So if any of my
Okay.
growth accounts, and that's depending upon how we define that, but any
Sure.
of my growth accounts, if they go yellow or green or red, then that's what we're laser focused on
Gotcha.
because those accounts usually have a higher customer lifetime value, so they're going to be our most profitable customers, which is important, obviously.
Of
Usually
course.
they're customers that have a higher value realization because that's why they're growth accounts. That makes sense because there's opportunities for us to grow that account, and we have a very solid relationship with them. And then after that, I may focus on the accounts that don't fall into because I don't want any churn if I can avoid it. And you know this, there are sometimes when churn is necessary. So let's
Yeah.
do that as a qualifier. There is sometimes you have to break up with and customers, and they break up with you, and sometimes it's a mutual understanding, and that
Yep.
happens. But whatever we can do to avoid or mitigate that, that is our objective. But to answer your question, we're usually focused on the high growth accounts because usually those are the most painful to lose.
No, 100%. And that makes sense, right? Like that strategy from like, a high growth account perspective, right? It's actually interesting too, kind of taking it back to, the story. There were a lot of pieces I want to dig into too. Like obviously the health is great. You getting ahead of the ball like a year in advance, I think that's crucial, especially for high growth. Um, and I think what was really interesting too, and this is something I speak to a lot, where, customer success managers kind of either forget, or maybe they're in an organization where it just doesn't have this ethos that they're potentially sales reps, right? It's very revenue focused. At the end of the day, you're proving value, right? You want to make sure that value realization, right? Okay, well, that's an element of selling. And when you talk about like those conversations, right? An element of selling is trying to problem solve, right? And of course, like there's a give and take. And you're like, okay, I recognize that, okay, they want to, potentially become an integration partner. I think that was what you mentioned in that particular scenario. Okay, great. Well, how can now it be mutually beneficial to both of us, right? And then you use that as a way to, realize the renewal and making sure it didn't dip.
No, it's interesting because when I was a customer success director, that was the last time I was an IC.
Mm-hmm.
I would have a difficult time explaining to people what I did. And you've been through this. We all have it.
Oh yeah, my family still doesn't know what I do.
Well, okay, I will share something with you. It's an entirely different anecdotal story, but I'm in a CS leadership group, and one of the other CS leaders has been trying for years to get her dad to understand what she does. Like, he just never grasped it. And for those of you that follow me, I have a Star Trek series. I have a newsletter where I do the characters, the roles in Star Trek, analogous to the customer success world. So those of you that are following me, you know what I'm talking about. So she actually let her dad listen to my video, and he came back. He goes, "I totally get what you do now."
That is awesome. That is awesome.
I think about like Captain Kirk, he's customer success leadership, and then Bones is customer support. So like everything that's part of the go-to-market team, and then of course Scotty, he's the engineer, so that's sales. So yeah, definitely, it's to your point though. To get off my tangent, the fun thing about customer success is that a lot of people don't get what we do, but the
Sure.
fun thing about customer success is that to a certain degree we do it all. And
Right.
problem solving is at the core of that. And so when you go back to that story, when I sat down, and the one thing that I should say, because this is something that I hear from almost everybody that's in a CSM role, it is very difficult to get an audience with the C-suite. And I
Mm-hmm.
emphasize that the person I was talking to in that first meeting was the CFO. And that's a huge get. If you can think
That's
of anything else,
huge.
that's a huge get. And that's why when he said that to me about this is not a partnership, that stopped me cold. And what I had to do was then I started talking about, like, why do you see it that way? What are your goals and objectives? What are your value drivers? To that point of they have problems, they have goals. How does this organization help them meet those objectives and solve those problems? And that's at the core of what we do as customer success professionals is we solve problems, but we also help, customers get to value by doing that.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great way of putting it. I still laugh at that, the example of just telling family about what we do. But yeah, but it's definitely, going back to the story. I mean, one huge getting to a CFO and getting to the C-suite. I think sometimes it's easier to start, from the top and then kind of work your way down, similar to sales, in that same degree. I'm curious though, like as far as the CFO conversation is interesting, right? Because, in me also being on the account manager side and customer success manager side, right? Like CFO, usually they're the ones to start to chop, right? Or worse, if you get put in front of a procurement officer or maybe third party procurement. I'm curious where, even in that particular scenario, or just generally speaking, how do, how do you manage the goals if they are kind of conflicting, so to speak, right? So I'll give you an example. Like a CFO will be like, "Hey, we need to do more with less," right? If you're selling a solution, I'm not hiring more customer success managers, salespeople. I need them to be enabled, be more efficient, but make more money or handle more. I'm curious as far as like how you navigated that.
No, it's a very good question because it's one of the things that I've been talking to my teams about is when we're working with customers, they usually have three goals. They want to make money, or save time.
Sure.
And if you can hit one or two of those, you're golden. And so if cost cutting is their issue, do I have a product or solution that will allow them to do that?
Mm,
And if I don't, then I may not be the right solution for them. But usually, if I have a product or solution, it's going to fit one of those categories. The challenge for us as customer success professionals is to understand what those categories are, because we do want product market fit, obviously.
right.
And if we're matching it to their goals and objectives, then our product or solution usually hits one of those. And if it hits none of those, again, it's probably not the right one. But what you always have to come back to is, if they say, oh, I need to be saving money, then let's look at how our solution does that. And so that our goals are aligned as opposed to being conflicted. That to me is the way that I address it, is figure out where our goals align and focus on that. And where they don't align, try to mitigate for that.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good way of putting it. I think alignment actually, and you mentioned this earlier too, about when we're talking about churn, is you might not always make the customer happy, right? Like they might not be a good fit. I actually had a conversation with someone recently, and especially like in the startup space, right? Like it's hard, right? You're trying to keep it afloat, you're being scrappy, you're bootstrapping. So especially a high ARR account, it matters, right? But I guess I think a lot of people, like, kind of a takeaway too, for the audience here, is sometimes they might not be a good fit. Sometimes it's better for your best interest, especially if they're taking a lot of time off your plate. Like maybe they're not getting value, maybe you're spending too much, and it's just better to kind of essentially rip the Band-Aid off. And it sounds like that's what you're saying in some cases too. Yeah.
No, I have a great story for that.
Yeah.
When I came into a startup, that, again, for startups, churn is an issue, and there's a lot of churn, particularly in the first few years, trying to get that product market fit stage. And in this particular account, the customer had not used the system at all, and they
Mm.
were a year into, like, no utilization numbers, and unfortunately, they just hadn't had the care and feeding that is necessary from a customer success perspective. And so when I arrived, the first thing they said to me is that this customer has zero utilization. They're up for renewal, and they're probably going to churn. And I immediately go into, let's figure out how to keep them, because that's what I want. I want no churn. But then when I spent some time with the CSM on the account, with the AE, and then with the customer, it was
Mm.
very obvious we didn't have a product for them,
Hmm.
because when they bought the service, we had a product on the roadmap
Oh
that
boy.
didn't come to fruition. Yeah, you know where I'm going with this,
Yeah.
right? And so, yeah. So what we had to do was, I had to sit down and I had to say, here's the deal. Right now, we do not have a product or feature that can accommodate your needs. So let's be
Mm.
upfront and honest about that. Nor do we have a product or feature in line of sight that can potentially. So those are two different things.
Yep.
And we have two choices. We can allow you to leave us at this point, and we'll part ways because it makes more sense for you.
Sure.
And we can come back to you when we do have a product or service that meets your ways. And they said, we appreciate your candor. We value the relationship. We will exit this particular contract, but let's stay in touch. And then a year later, we actually did have something on the roadmap, and they were primed to come back in. And they actually did some co-innovation with us to help us
Wow.
refine it to really better meet them. And it was something that we could go to GA with our other customers. So it wasn't just for them. But what I loved at the end of the day was we retained their relationship, and more importantly, their trust and respect.
Yeah. No, that's crucial. And I think it goes back to, right, like when we're talking about high growth accounts, right now the buzz, for me, I've done both. I've worked high growth, and then I've worked, later in my career, more of the tech touch and digital CS model. But the biggest thing that, everyone's talking about that, but they sometimes forget about, it's still a relationship at the end of the day. And, it's a partnership, no matter what way you deliver communications and so on, and how you work and partner with that customer. And that's fantastic, because now that person, again, I don't know what organization or whatever, but like the long-term value of that contract, lifetime value is crucial. They'll probably be a customer for years on end. Obviously, given if it still meets their needs, but like they'll trust you as an organization and as a partner in the long run, probably above anybody else, for being
No,
so transparent.
No, you're spot, because what I like to focus on, the AR is important, the NRR is really where that's my sweet spot, but also the customer lifetime value.
Yeah.
And you hit on that because that's a customer that we will retain and we can grow. But more importantly, we get a lot of brand equity with that customer, because then they're like, okay, Deidre and her team, they couldn't meet my needs a year ago, but now they can. And that customer comes in and then they're ready to be an evangelist for us. And they're ready to go out and talk to other customers and they're referenceable. You can't pay for that. That is
Yeah.
brand equity. That is gold. And that's the
Yep.
other part of it. So yeah. Yeah.
So cool. It's so true. So crucial. I mean, referrals are like the best way. Having an evangelist is,
Yes.
it's a
Yes.
game changer, and
Yes.
especially in this space, there's a lot of competition. There continues to be more. I was just talking about somebody recently about Y Combinator. I kind of stroll on there about like, hey, what are the new companies that are, getting within the Y Combinator batch? And I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, the amount of competition. Now it's all AI, but before it was, very much .com boom, etc. But like the amount of competition that's out there is insane. But now, like, again, more than ever, and it continues to be, having an evangelist referral program,
Mhm.
that's also something that's crucial.
Yeah, no, I've been a part of an organization that had a very impressive referral program, and I'm a huge advocate. They take there's some effort that needs to go into it, so it's usually from a larger enterprise type organizations. But yeah, it's they're important to any organization, and CS
Yeah,
leads that, which is another thing that's important. The hopefully
100%.
they do. Okay. Hopefully
No,
they do.
it's awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. Well, I mean, listen, this has been awesome. I think there's like a lot of key takeaways. We kind of went a bunch of different directions, and I love it. I mean, that's one thing I will say, because it's really some good facts and takeaways for the audience. And I think like kind of you could tell me too, like as far as if I'm catching them all, and if I miss any, I think like the biggest core, right, is relationship selling, but also having a
Yeah.
process too. Seems like you
Mhm.
had that, going in,
Mhm.
getting ahead of the curve too. Like
Mhm.
if you're a CSM kind of just getting in the space, the
Mhm.
sooner the better. Obviously, you have a process in mind, but still focusing on that problem solving is going to be key. No matter what, you know, top, whether it's high touch, low touch, tech touch,
Yeah.
whatever that might be, it's still a partnership at the end of the day. And then obviously
Mhm.
proving that value. And in the interesting one takeaway too is that sometimes they may not be a fit, um,
Correct.
but
Mhm.
which is also pretty interesting too. But anything else that I missed there? I mean, there's quite a bit of takeaways.
No, you did a very good job of encapsulating. I want to encapsulating the I would say the most salient points, but there's two that I
Yeah,
do want to focus on because it's something that's sort of it's something that is now becoming is starting to resonate with individuals in the SaaS space is the concept of a go to market team.
yeah,
And what I did touch on very briefly, and I didn't highlight it, but I know you picked up on it, is this was not something that was just owned by customer success.
yeah,
That success I do not want to take credit for solely. I said we brought in marketing, we brought in sales. If we needed to, we brought in product. If you really truly want to be successful in this highly competitive space, you have to have a go to market structure where there are no silos between those respective lines of business. And you all have to partner for success for the customer. So I really like to focus on that. And then the last piece is you touched on it, and I kind of went into a tangent. We are focusing on revenue growth. I
yeah,
apologize for that, but I said I would do that. We are focusing on it, and I want CSMs and I want the CS space not to be afraid of that.
yeah.
Understand your financials, ARR, NRR, cost to serve, customer lifetime value. These should be metrics that we're all very familiar with and comfortable talking about. So that would be the only other two things that I would add.
No, for sure. I mean, and we could dig into that too. I mean, it's going back to the cross functional relationships.
Mhm.
From
Yeah.
your experience, right? Because again, it takes a team. It's not just solely on the CSM. But what have you seen be successful in that in terms of making sure that you have the
Uh,
buy-in for them to step in? Because that's another challenge too. There's buy-in and making sure that they do their part, end of the
correct.
deal, right? Any sort of,
Mhm. Yeah.
SLAs, but like I'm curious. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I my whole life is about SLAs. Don't get me started on that. That's another thing. No, let's not go there. Dealing with some contracts and it's SLAs can be your fun pace and your happy place, and not so much. Um, the two things I will say are just critical is they need to understand the value that the CS organization brings. And that's the challenging part for us, but we have to go to sales. And when I'm sitting down with my CRO, the first thing I'm saying is, how can I help you and your team? Okay. How do I enable you and your team to be successful? Because ultimately, to a certain degree, they have a revenue number as well as we have a revenue number, but we all got to partner together because we're working with the existing customers and they're looking for net new logos. And we need to do that together. But then on the flip side of that, I have a regular cadence with my CMO and just sitting there and saying, okay, what kind of lead gen and what lead motion can customer success work on? But we're also planning events and we're also looking at ways to engage our customers through podcasts, through lunch and learns, through one-to-minis. Those are things that I'm working with marketing on, and that's a partnership. And then at the center of all that is product. And sitting down with the product team, because it's a loop with us. We actually have a formal customer feedback process so that our customers can provide real-time feedback to our product team. That infuses what we do from a product enhancement, but also when it looks for R&D for product development. So making sure that each line of business understands the value customer success can provide, and then have a regular cadence with those individuals respectively so that they understand what we're doing on a regular basis. I hope that answers your question.
No, 100% it does. No, it's definitely a great way to, kind of bring it all together. And I'm curious on like the revenue piece of it, right? There's a lot of metrics out there to kind of keep up with. To be honest, I hear new ones, constantly. I'm just like, oh, what's this acronym? And I couldn't even tell you, like, to be honest, my mind runs away from me. I'm like, what is it? I watched a presentation earlier today and I took a screenshot. I'm like, I got to look at this later. I'm like, I don't know what this is about, but I'm curious.
I'm a certified revenue architect, so I need to know these numbers because maybe I missed them. Okay, but I think what you're probably wanting to know, like, what are the metrics that I think are the top of mind, at least from a CS perspective, or were you going someplace else?
Well, I'm curious, like, again, like just in general, like where do you go and learn, right? Like, obviously now we're loaded with a ton of different, sources, but I'm curious on like where you go, because like, of course there's ChatGPT and so on, but like even, take a step back, right? Like, there's podcasts, there's everything, but I'm curious about like you, like, where do you go? Where does Edra go to find out this information? Or maybe in the past when you did?
I love that. Well, I would be a disservice, and this is not a commercial, but I'm not being facetious. I am literally a revenue architect certification, and I got the certification through Winning by Design. So they are first and foremost my resource. I have a textbook that is the size of my arm almost. It's like huge. I'm not being hyperbolic. So that's my first source. And then I follow people on LinkedIn that focus on revenue. And then I'm sure they're probably some of the same people that you follow. But when I look at when they post something and it is directly tied to revenue, I am going to engage with them. You can find me at least once a week. I actually do what's called Monday metrics, where I really just drill down into the metrics that I'm following. Sometimes I'll repost something. So those are my two primary sources are, again, Winning by Design, but then the other piece of it, and I'm not a paid sponsor. I want to make that clear. I'm just saying that because I have the certification. But I follow a lot of people. But like, what about you? Where do you get yours? What's your source?
For me, oh my gosh, it's honestly a ton of books. So I kind of went on the route of just like for the past 10 years, just tons of Amazon books. I'm starting to get the Kindle because I'm running out of space. You could even see a few of them behind me from Fanatical Prospecting. Yeah. There's a whole nother bookshelf and it's like, oh, this is not good. I'm running out of room. But I would say definitely a lot of books. Even one in particular, which I thought was interesting. This is more on the prospecting route. And it's still, I have to pick it up again because I wonder if it's still a lot of it's true today. Predictable Revenue. He was, I forget the author. It was a former Salesforce executive or represent. I forget exactly. Great book. It was actually, I had it in the start of my career. And again, I was actually on the fence of going from new business to account management. And it kind of just like, it's like, all right, we're going to go the account management route. But I still read it. That was like the book at the organization at the time to read. And there was such good bits of information in there to run away with that still rang true for CS, right? Like figuring out how to build relationships. I think the key thing was of familiarity. I think at that time was like, all right, probably your best bet is to reach out on LinkedIn or try to connect with them first. LinkedIn was just getting kind of its ground running, then cold call them, then send them the email. So you have that frame of reference of familiarity. So again, I'm on my own tangent. You could see kind of how this goes, but
no, I mean, I think probably the one, if we're getting into books, because I'm a book nerd.
Sure.
I'm adding this one to my Goodreads. That's what I was doing while you were talking. So I'm adding predictable revenue to my Goodreads. I think one that I refer to a lot of the people that I mentor it's called Goodbye Churn. And that one it's the author is Mary Poppins. So Mary, I'm giving a shout out to her, but there's two things I love about it. She goes into a situation where her CEO is saying, we have a churn problem. How do you fix it? And then she went into it and really goes, and it's a quick read. So that's why I love referring it for people. She gets into what metrics you need to be presenting to the C-suite so they understand how to solve the problem. And that's what because a lot of the, to your point, there's so many metrics out there. Be able to figure out what metrics matter to your particular organization, and then make sure that you have the data to support those metrics, because that's the biggest challenge in our space. The other person that I'm really spending a lot of time with is our data architect. So piece of it is, the data scientist, your data, whoever gets can crunch the numbers for you. That's the person you should have on your speed dial. But understand those numbers. So that's a book that I would recommend. And there's a whole host of others that I'm happy that anybody who wants to ping me, I'm happy to send them to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. If you want, we could throw it in the show notes too, in the description if you want, Amazon link, but whatever works. That's awesome though. Definitely I'm curious to check it out myself, but, well, this was a great conversation. I know I kind of did a mini wrap up before, but we just went into it. But we are coming up on time. But before we wrap, I'm curious on where can everybody find you? I know you're doing a couple of different things. Obviously, I'm sure you're definitely on LinkedIn. I know that for sure. But I'm just curious about ways for people to get in touch or anything else kind of to drop in before we go.
No, first and foremost, connect with me on LinkedIn. It's Edra S. Williams. I'm at DeepHow, so you can find me there. And then also I have a newsletter. It's also tied to LinkedIn. So any Star Trek fans out there, definitely connect with me. And even if you're not a fan of Star Trek, but you want to understand more about customer success, I literally have a newsletter that sort of breaks it down on a weekly basis. So that's the best way to find me.
That's awesome. No, I definitely will include that. Well, thanks so much, Edra, for being on the show. It's great to have you, and look forward to you, connecting in the future. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Joe. This was wonderful. Take care.
That's a wrap for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening. If you got some value from this conversation, hit subscribe, leave a rating or review, and share it with someone who's also out there trying to build a better customer success or go-to-market strategy, even if it's messy along the way. And if you want more frameworks, tools, automated playbooks, check out jodostechtouch.com and subscribe to our newsletter. That link is in the description. Thanks so much for being here. Keep building, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next one. Quick note before we wrap. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. The ideas and opinions shared here are of my own or those of my guests, and don't reflect the views of any current or former employers, clients, or partners. We might reference tools, platforms, or companies, but nothing shared here should be taken as fact, endorsement, or criticism. Do your own research and always consult your team or legal counsel when making any business decisions. This content is not legal, financial, or business advice. It's just us sharing what's worked, what hasn't, and how we've learned from both. So thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.